Madison Torres pressed her thumb against the tarnished FBI badge hidden deep in her coat pocket, a nervous habit she'd developed since leaving the bureau 8 months ago. The metal felt cold through the thin fabric lining, worn smooth from years of unconscious touching during the darkest cases of her career. The imposing Gothic revival gates of Clearwater Academy loomed ahead, their wrought iron twisted into elaborate patterns that seemed designed more to keep secrets in than to keep intruders out. As Madison's 10-year-old Honda Civic crunched over the perfectly manicured gravel driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was entering a different world entirely. Maseratis and Tesla Model S sedans lined the circular drive like a luxury car showcase, their chrome gleaming under the October morning sun. Just teach English literature, she reminded herself. No more predators. No more late-night stakeouts. No more children who needed saving. No more Emma. The memory hit her like it always did, unexpected and brutal. 11-year-old Emma Rodriguez, with her bright smile and Harry Potter backpack, found hanging in her foster family's basement 3 days after Madison had promised her that the bad men would never hurt her again. The trafficking ring had been dismantled. 17 arrests made, but Emma couldn't wait for justice. The nightmares had been too much. Madison's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Dr. Carlson, her therapist, had warned her about triggers, about how trauma had a way of lurking in ordinary moments. You saved hundreds of children. Madison, she'd said during their last session, you can't save them all. If you're feeling that rush of what's going to happen next, hit that like button. It really helps more people discover these stories. And if you want to share where you're watching from, drop it in the comments below. For those who want to support more stories like this one, there's a thanks button right under this video. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps me bring you more inspiring tales of courage and standing up for what's right. Thank you for being here. Now, let's see what happens when push comes to shove. But Emma's face still appeared in quiet moments, asking why salvation had come too late. The Clearwater Academy main building rose before her like something out of a Gothic novel, all pointed arches and flying buttresses. Built in 1873, when American robber barons wanted their children educated in buildings that rivaled European cathedrals. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, and Madison could see students moving through the corridors inside. Their navy blazers and pressed khaki pants, a uniform sea of privilege. She parked in the faculty section, her modest Honda looking distinctly out of place among the BMWs and Audis. The employee parking spaces closest to the building bore small placards reserved for Dr. Hamilton, reserved for Ms. Ashford, reserved for Coach Morrison. Madison's temporary placard simply read, New faculty. Everything here has hierarchy, she noted. FBI training automatically cataloging details. Even parking spaces sent messages about status and belonging. The main reception area took Madison's breath away, despite herself. Marble floors stretched across a space that could have housed her entire Boston apartment twice over, while oil portraits of distinguished alumni gazed down from mahogany-paneled walls. A bronze plaque near the entrance proudly listed notable graduates, 3 Supreme Court justices, 12 senators, 2 presidents, and dozens of Fortune 500 CEOs. You must be Ms. Torres. The voice belonged to a woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Madison's monthly salary. I'm Principal Lisa Brooks. Welcome to Clearwater Academy. Principal Brooks had the kind of polished appearance that spoke of expensive salons and personal trainers, but Madison's trained eye caught the subtle signs of stress the slight tremor in her hands, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the barely concealed tension in her shoulders. Madison had interviewed enough crime victims to recognize someone carrying a heavy burden. "Thank you for this opportunity," Madison replied, offering a firm handshake. "I'm looking forward to working with the students." "Oh, you'll find our students quite unique," Principal Brooks said, and something in her tone made Madison's instincts prickle. "They come from very accomplished families. Some have been with us since kindergarten. They know our traditions quite well." The word traditions hung in the air with subtle weight, as if it meant more than typical school customs. Principal Brooks led Madison through corridors lined with more portraits and trophy cases filled with awards dating back decades. Students they passed offered polite nods to the principal. But Madison noticed how their eyes followed their conversation, how clusters of teenagers would pause their conversations until the adults had moved on. "Your classroom is in the crane wing," Principal Brooks explained as they climbed a wide staircase with an ornate bronze banister. "It's our newest section, donated by the Crane family in 2015. Robert Crane, our board chairman, has been incredibly generous to the Academy." Madison filed away the name automatically. In her FBI days, she'd learned to pay attention to who held power in any organization. The benefactors often wielded more influence than the official administrators. "Mr. Crane's son Ethan is a senior this year," Principal Brooks continued. "Exceptional student, very involved in school leadership." And there was something carefully neutral about the way she said this, as if she were reading from a script. The Crane wing was noticeably newer than the rest of the building, all clean lines and modern fixtures while still maintaining the Gothic aesthetic. Large windows let in streams of natural light, and the hallways were wider, designed for the flow of contemporary student life. But Madison noticed something else. The security cameras were more numerous here, and positioned at unusual angles, not just monitoring for safety, but covering every possible sight line. Odd, she thought. What do they need to watch so carefully in the newest, most expensive section of the school? "Here's your classroom," Principal Brooks said, opening a heavy wooden door marked English Literature, Ms. Torres. The room was beautiful, with tall windows overlooking the Academy's sprawling grounds, built-in bookshelves lined with leather-bound classics, and 30 antique wooden desks arranged in perfect rows. "The students are quite bright," Principal Brooks said, checking her watch. "They'll challenge you in ways you might not expect, but I'm sure someone with your background can handle whatever comes up." Madison looked at her sharply. Her resume for the teaching position had mentioned her previous career as a federal investigator, but she'd kept the details deliberately vague. "My background? Oh, we always do thorough checks on our faculty," Principal Brooks replied smoothly. FBI work must have been fascinating. Quite a change. Moving to education. "I wanted something more peaceful," Madison said carefully. Principal Brooks nodded, but her expression suggested she understood there was more to the story. "Well, if you need anything at all, my door is always open. Always." She emphasized the last word in a way that felt significant. After Principal Brooks left, Madison spent the morning arranging her classroom, setting up her desk, and reviewing the lesson plans for her 4 sections of Advanced Placement English Literature. The reading list was impressively rigorous: Shakespeare, Chaucer, Morrison, Fitzgerald. These students would be well prepared for any college literature program in the country. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times, she looked up to see faces in the hallway windows, students peering in curiously before moving on. Word of the new teacher was clearly spreading. At 11:30, During what the schedule called community period, Madison decided to explore the campus and get her bearings. The academy grounds were extensive, with multiple academic buildings connected by covered walkways, athletic fields that looked like they belonged at a Division I university, and formal gardens that wouldn't have been out of place at Versailles. Students moved between buildings in small groups, and Madison began to notice patterns in their social dynamics. There were the obvious cliques athletes with their Letterman jackets, theater students with their dramatic flair, academic achievers with their serious expressions and heavy backpacks. But there was another group that didn't fit the typical high school social structure. 5 students who moved through the campus like they owned it, receiving deference from classmates and even respectful nods from faculty. They weren't necessarily the biggest or most athletic, but something about their confidence and the way others responded to them suggested they wielded significant influence. The center of this group was clearly a tall, lean boy with perfectly styled dark hair and an expensive watch that caught the light as he gestured while talking. Madison estimated he was 17 or 18, with the kind of effortless confidence that usually came from a lifetime of privilege. His navy blazer fit like it had been custom-tailored, and his leather shoes probably cost more than most teachers made in a week. As Madison watched from across the courtyard, she saw him approach a younger student who was sitting alone on a bench, reading. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, but Madison's trained eye caught the body language the younger boy's shoulders tensing, his book closing immediately, his head nodding rapidly before he gathered his things and hurried away. The confident boy rejoined his group, and one of his companions handed him something that looked like cash. Madison felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the same instinct that had served her well during her FBI career. She was witnessing something that looked like a transaction, a power dynamic that went beyond typical teenage social hierarchies. Just high school politics, she told herself. Not every interaction is evidence of a crime. But her instincts had been honed by years of investigating predators, and they were screaming that something wasn't right at Clearwater Academy. The lunch period provided more opportunities for observation. Madison ate in the faculty dining room, an elegant space with crystal chandeliers and waitstaff that served meals on actual china plates. The other teachers were friendly enough, though she sensed the same careful politeness she'd noticed from Principal Brooks. "How are you settling in?" asked Dr. Hamilton. The AP history teacher, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded Madison of her grandmother. "Still getting oriented," Madison replied. "The students seem very engaged." "Oh, they're engaged, all right," said Coach Morrison, the athletic director, with a laugh that didn't sound entirely amused. "Especially the ones who think the rules don't apply to them." Dr. Hamilton shot him a warning look, and he returned to his salad without elaborating. "Every school has its challenges," Dr. Hamilton said diplomatically. "The key is finding the right balance between maintaining standards and working within the existing framework." Again, Madison noticed the careful word choice, as if everyone at Clearwater Academy had learned to speak in coded language. After lunch, Madison had a free period and decided to explore the library, a magnificent space that rose 3 stories with spiral staircases and reading alcoves that looked like something out of Harry Potter. Students worked quietly at long wooden tables, and librarians moved between the stacks with practiced silence. Madison was browsing the contemporary fiction section when she overheard a conversation from the next aisle. "I can't keep doing this," a voice whispered urgently. "My parents will kill me if they find out." "But they won't find out," another voice replied, calm and assured. "Not if you follow the program exactly like we discussed." Madison moved closer to the gap between bookshelves and could see two students, a girl with anxious features and expensive-looking blonde highlights, and a boy Madison recognized from the courtyard earlier, one of the confident group's members. "Blake, this is insane," the girl continued. "If I get caught cheating—" "You won't get caught," the boy named Blake interrupted. "We've been doing this for 3 years. Not one person has ever been caught. But if you don't participate, well," he let the sentence hang meaningfully. "What does that mean?" "It means accidents happen to people who don't fit in. Embarrassing photos show up online. Parents get anonymous calls about their children's behavior. You understand?" The girl's face went pale. "That's blackmail." "That's insurance," Blake corrected smoothly. "Insurance that everyone stays committed to the program. You want to be part of the Clearwater community, don't you? You want to graduate with your class. Go to Yale, like your sister did." Madison felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't teenage social drama. This was systematic coercion, and it sounded organized, practiced, institutional. The girl nodded reluctantly, and Blake smiled. "Good. The test answers will be in your locker by tomorrow morning. Use them, pass the test, and everything stays smooth. Refuse." He shrugged meaningfully. After they left, Madison stood among the bookshelves, her mind racing. In her FBI career, she'd learned that institutional abuse rarely started with major crimes. It usually began with small compromises, gradual erosion of boundaries, systems that trained people to stay silent and compliant. What she'd just witnessed sounded exactly like the grooming techniques used by organized predators. The afternoon brought her first actual classes, and Madison found herself face-to-face with 67 of Clearwater Academy's finest students across 4 sections of AP Literature. They were undeniably bright, articulate, and well-prepared. Their essays on Hamlet showed sophisticated understanding of symbolism and theme, and their class discussions demonstrated the kind of critical thinking skills that would serve them well in any Ivy League university. But Madison also noticed subtler dynamics. Certain students deferred to others in ways that seemed to have nothing to do with academic ability. When she asked questions about Hamlet's moral choices, some students glanced toward specific classmates before offering their opinions, as if seeking approval for their thoughts. In her third period class, she met the confident boy from the courtyard in person. "Ms. Torres, I'm Ethan Crane," he said after class, approaching her desk with a smile that managed to be both charming and somehow calculating. "Welcome to Clearwater Academy." Up close, Madison could see that Ethan was even more striking than she'd realized from a distance. Intelligent gray eyes, strong jawline, and the kind of natural charisma that made people want to listen when he spoke. If he'd been older, she could have seen him in politics or business leadership, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made Madison's FBI instincts flicker to life. She'd seen that look before, in interview rooms across from suspects who believed they were untouchable. "Thank you, Ethan. I understand your family has been very generous to the school. My father believes in investing in institutions that shape the next generation of leaders," Ethan replied smoothly. "I hope you'll find our community as rewarding as we intend to make it for you." There was something loaded about the way he said community, as if membership came with specific obligations. "I'm looking forward to getting to know all my students better," Madison replied neutrally. "Oh, you will," Ethan said, his smile widening slightly. "We make sure all our teachers feel very integrated into the Clearwater experience." After he left, Madison sat at her desk wondering if she was reading too much into normal teenage interactions. Perhaps her time investigating predators had made her see threats where none existed. Perhaps the careful way everyone spoke was simply the politeness that came with an elite education. But that evening, as she packed up her materials to go home, Madison found a folder that hadn't been there that morning, tucked under a stack of papers on her desk. Inside were photographs of 5 different women, all appearing to be in their 20s or 30s, all clearly in situations that would end their teaching careers instantly. One photo showed a woman in what appeared to be a compromising position with a student. Another captured someone who looked like they were accepting money in an envelope. A third showed a teacher who appeared to be intoxicated at what looked like a school function. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note, "Every year, Clearwater Academy unfortunately loses teachers who don't fit our community standards. We hope you'll find ways to blend in more successfully." Madison's hands were completely steady as she closed the folder, but her pulse was racing. This wasn't high school politics or elite snobbery. This was a systematic intimidation campaign, and she was clearly the target. Madison drove home through the Massachusetts countryside, her mind churning over everything she'd observed during her first day. The photos, the conversation in the library, the careful way everyone spoke, the deference shown to certain students. It all painted a picture of an institution where normal rules didn't apply, where power was concentrated in the hands of people who used it to maintain control through fear. Her small apartment in Cambridge felt like a sanctuary after the oppressive atmosphere of Clearwater Academy. Madison made herself a simple dinner of pasta and salad, poured a glass of wine, and sat at her kitchen table with the folder from her desk. Looking at the photos more carefully, she realized these weren't candid shots. They were carefully staged, professionally lit, and composed to look authentic while being completely fabricated. The teacher accepting money was clearly posing. The compromising position photo was taken from an angle that obscured faces enough to maintain plausible deniability while still being damaging. Someone had resources, skill, and the motivation to create sophisticated blackmail material. Madison pulled out her laptop and began doing what she did best: investigating. She started with basic searches on Clearwater Academy, looking for news articles, alumni information, and public records about the institution. What she found was illuminating. Clearwater Academy had an unusually high turnover rate among faculty, almost 40% per year, compared to a national average of 16% for private schools. Over the past 5 years, 11 different teachers had resigned suddenly, often in the middle of the school year, with minimal public explanation. Madison cross-referenced these departures with local news articles and found a pattern. 3 teachers had been arrested on charges that were later dropped. 2 had faced public scandals involving alleged inappropriate relationships that were never substantiated. 4 others had simply vanished from public record entirely, as if they'd left teaching altogether. But perhaps most interesting were the departures that coincided with specific events at the school. In 2019, a teacher named Jennifer Walsh resigned 2 days after the academy announced a major donation from the Crane family. In 2020, Michael Rodriguez left suddenly after being named Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, an honor that should have secured his position. Each departure seemed to happen just as teachers were gaining recognition or influence that might have challenged existing power structures. Madison's FBI experience had taught her to recognize patterns of institutional protection. This looked exactly like what she'd seen in cases involving systematic abuse. A cycle of intimidation, removal of threats, and maintenance of silence that allowed harmful behaviors to continue unchecked. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope your first day went well. Some friendly advice: successful teachers at Clearwater focus on fitting in rather than standing out. Sleep well." Madison stared at the message for a long moment, then screen captured it and saved it to a secure folder on her phone. In her FBI days, she'd learned to document everything. She was about to turn off her laptop when curiosity prompted one more search: Ethan Crane, Massachusetts. The results were surprisingly extensive. Ethan appeared in numerous society page photos, charity event coverage, and prep school athletics articles. He was clearly being groomed for leadership, with leadership positions in student government, internships at his father's company, and community service activities that looked impressive on college applications. But Madison's trained eye caught details that others might miss. In group photos, Ethan was consistently at the center, with other students arranged around him in ways that suggested deference rather than friendship. In candid shots, he often appeared to be giving instructions or directions to his peers. Most interesting was a photo from a school fundraiser 6 months earlier. Ethan stood with several adults who Madison recognized from her research, 2 of the teachers who had resigned suddenly. Principal Brooks, looking notably uncomfortable, and his father, Robert Crane, with a satisfied smile. The photo was captioned, "Ethan Crane discusses student leadership initiatives with faculty and administration." But Madison noticed that the 2 teachers who appeared in this photo had both resigned within 3 weeks of when it was taken. That night, Madison lay in bed, unable to sleep, her mind cycling through everything she'd observed and discovered. Part of her wondered if she was overreacting, seeing conspiracy where there might simply be unfortunate coincidence. But another part of her, the part that had spent 8 years hunting predators and dismantling criminal networks, recognized all the warning signs of systematic institutional abuse. The deference patterns, the careful language, the high faculty turnover, the sophisticated intimidation materials, the consolidation of power around specific students. It all pointed to an organization that had learned to operate outside normal oversight, protected by wealth, influence, and a culture of silence. Madison reached into her nightstand drawer and pulled out a small, secure phone that she'd kept from her FBI days. She hadn't used it in 8 months, but some habits died hard. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for: Agent Ryan Mitchell, her former partner who now specialized in institutional crimes. She didn't call him yet, but she needed to know the option was there. Because whatever was happening at Clearwater Academy, Madison was beginning to suspect it went much deeper than teenage bullying or prep school politics. And if these students thought they could intimidate her the way they'd intimidated other teachers, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Madison Torres had spent 8 years hunting monsters. She wasn't about to be intimidated by privileged teenagers, no matter how much power they thought their family's money could buy. But she also wasn't naive. She knew that money and influence could protect people who seemed untouchable. And she knew that institutions had ways of closing ranks around their own interests. The badge in her coat pocket felt heavier as she finally drifted off to sleep, a reminder of the oath she'd taken years ago to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Some promises, once made, never expired. 3 weeks into her tenure at Clearwater Academy, Madison had documented 17 separate incidents of systematic intimidation, coercion, and what appeared to be organized criminal activity. She'd photographed the contents of her desk drawer, which now regularly contained gifts, photos of previous teachers in compromising situations, anonymous notes suggesting she should be more flexible with grading policies, and twice, envelopes containing cash with messages about maintaining community standards. She'd also begun building relationships with students who seemed to exist on the periphery of Ethan Crane's sphere of influence. Dylan Hayes, a senior in her fourth period AP Literature class, had caught her attention immediately. Brilliant analysis of complex texts, insightful questions about moral ambiguity in literature, but something haunted behind his eyes that Madison recognized from her FBI days. Dylan reminded her of witnesses in trafficking cases, intelligent young people who'd seen too much, knew too much, but had been trained through fear to stay silent. "Ms. Torres," Dylan approached her desk after Thursday's class, his voice barely above a whisper. "Could I talk to you about something?" "Of course. Dylan, what's on your mind?" He glanced around the empty classroom, checking corners and doorways with the hypervigilance that Madison knew came from living with constant threat. "Not here. Too many ears. Could you meet me at the town library tomorrow after school? I have something to show you." Madison's pulse quickened. In her FBI career, this was how every major breakthrough had started, a witness finally ready to talk, but only in conditions they felt were safe. "Of course. What time?" 5 o'clock, reference section, and Ms. Torres, Dylan's voice dropped even lower. "Be careful who you trust here. Really careful." Friday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling, typical October weather in Massachusetts. Madison had planned to leave directly for her meeting with Dylan, but a faculty meeting ran late, discussing preparations for the upcoming Parents' Weekend. She found herself alone in her classroom at 4:30, grading papers and thinking about everything Dylan might be ready to share. The Crane Wing felt different on Friday afternoons. Most students had left for weekend activities, faculty had departed for their own plans, and the maintenance staff worked in the older buildings first. Madison had noticed this pattern over the past 3 weeks, the newest. Most expensive section of campus became virtually deserted after 4 o'clock on Fridays. She was gathering papers to take home when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Not the quick pace of someone heading to their destination, but the slow, deliberate movement of people who had arrived at theirs. Madison's FBI training activated automatically. Multiple sets of footsteps, coordinated movement, no conversation, which suggested prior planning. She looked toward the classroom door and saw shadows moving past the frosted glass panel. 4 distinct figures, positioning themselves strategically rather than simply passing by. Madison reached into her purse and touched the secure phone she'd been carrying for weeks, finger hovering over the emergency contact for Agent Mitchell. But she hesitated. Was she overreacting? Reading threat into normal student activity? The classroom door opened without a knock. Ethan Crane entered first, his usual confident smile replaced by something harder, more purposeful. Behind him came Blake Stevens, Mason Reed, and Ashley Park, the core of his network that Madison had been observing and documenting. "Ms. Torres," Ethan said, closing the door behind them with deliberate care. "We need to have a conversation." Madison remained seated at her desk, hands visible, posture relaxed despite her racing pulse. FBI crisis management training appear calm. Assess the threat. Control what you can control. "Ethan, if you have academic concerns, we should schedule a proper meeting with administration present." Blake moved to block the door while Mason and Ashley positioned themselves near the windows, cutting off potential exit routes. This wasn't teenage impulsiveness, this was tactical positioning. "Oh, this isn't about academics," Ethan said, his smile returning but not reaching his eyes. This is about understanding community standards, integration, fitting in. Madison stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. I'm not sure what you mean. Really? Ashley spoke for the first time, her voice carrying mock concern. Because word around campus is that you've been asking a lot of questions, paying attention to things that aren't really your business. Teaching is my business, Madison replied evenly. Everything that affects my students' education is my business. Mason laughed, but there was no humor in it. See, that's where you're confused. You think you're here to teach, but really, you're here to do what every other teacher learns to do, follow the program. What program is that? Ethan stepped closer, and Madison noted how his casual confidence had shifted into something more aggressive. The program where you understand that certain students have certain needs, where you recognize that grades sometimes need to reflect family considerations rather than test scores, where you learn that seeing things and reporting things are very different choices. Madison's mind cataloged every word, every gesture, every positioning. This was confession, threat and intimidation all wrapped together. But they were also giving her evidence. And if I don't understand this program, well, Blake said, pulling out his phone, that would be unfortunate, because teachers who don't fit in tend to have accidents, bad luck, embarrassing situations. Madison felt her FBI instincts fully engage. This wasn't just bullying or power games. This was systematic intimidation designed to maintain a criminal organization. Like the photos in my desk, she asked directly. Ethan's eyes flashed with surprise before his composure returned. Photos? I'm sure I don't know what you mean. But Mason wasn't as controlled. You should pay attention to those photos. They show what happens to teachers who think they're special. Ashley moved closer. The thing is, Ms. Torres, you seem to think you're different from other teachers, but you're not. You're just another woman in over her head, trying to survive in a world that's bigger than you understand. Madison calculated distances, assessed capabilities, and made a decision that would change everything. You're right, she said quietly. I am different from other teachers. She moved toward her desk, ostensibly to gather her papers, but actually to position herself better for what she sensed was coming. Different how? Ethan asked, moving to intercept her. Different in ways that are about to become very relevant to your future. That's when Ethan's mask finally dropped completely. You know what I'm tired of playing games. His voice turned cold, authoritative. Blake, Mason, show Ms. Torres exactly how things work for teachers who don't cooperate. The attack happened fast, but not faster than Madison's training had prepared her for. Mason moved from her left, Blake from the right, while Ethan positioned himself to block any escape toward the door. But they had made a critical error in their assessment. Madison Torres wasn't a victim. She was a federal agent who had spent 8 years confronting dangerous criminals, and her muscle memory knew exactly what to do. When Mason grabbed for her arm, Madison pivoted, used his momentum against him, and sent him stumbling into a desk. When Blake lunged forward, she sidestepped and swept his legs, dropping him hard to the floor. But it was what happened next that would define everything that followed. Ethan, seeing his enforcers neutralized, made a decision that transformed this from assault to something much worse. In his rage and desperation to reassert dominance, he grabbed Madison's wrist and yanked hard, spinning her around and forcing her against her own desk. You want to learn respect, he snarled, his other hand grabbing at the waistband of her dress pants. Let me teach you what happens to teachers who think they're too good for our program. In that moment, as Ethan forcefully pulled down Madison's pants in front of Blake's recording phone, several things happened simultaneously. Madison's trauma from her FBI cases, all those children she'd tried to save from predators exactly like this, crashed into her present reality. But instead of paralyzing her, it crystallized into perfect, cold fury. Her FBI training overrode every other response, and, most importantly, Ethan Crane had just committed a federal crime against a federal agent, with witnesses, with recording devices, in full view of multiple cameras. Madison's response was swift, professional, and devastating. "Ethan Crane," she said in a voice that cut through the room like steel, simultaneously pulling her pants back up and turning to face Blake's camera directly. "Blake Stevens, Mason Reed, Ashley Park. Today is Friday, October 27th, 4:32 p.m., Clearwater Academy Crane Wing, room 247. Her voice carried an authority that stopped everyone cold. "You have just committed felony sexual assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, creation of child exploitation material, assault on a federal officer, and federal civil rights violations." Ethan froze. "What are you talking about?" Madison reached into her purse with deliberate calm and withdrew her FBI credentials, holding them up to Blake's still recording phone. "Special Agent Madison Torres, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number 2847. I am a federal law enforcement officer working undercover in an institutional investigation. You are being recorded committing federal crimes." Mason scrambled to his feet, panic replacing arrogance. "Holy shit! She's FBI!" Blake's phone wavered as his hands began shaking. "Ethan, what do we do?" Ashley backed toward the windows. "This is insane. We need to get out of here." But Ethan, facing the complete destruction of everything he'd built, made one final, desperate mistake. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice cracked with desperation. "It's your word against ours. My father owns this school. My family owns half this town." Madison smiled for the first time since entering Clearwater Academy. And it was not a pleasant expression. "Ethan, I've been documenting your organization for 3 weeks. I have photographs, recordings, witness statements, and financial records. But more importantly, you just confessed to and committed federal crimes while being recorded." She held up her secure phone, which had been recording since the moment they'd entered her classroom. "And in case you're wondering about those cameras you installed throughout this wing, FBI cybercrime specialists have been monitoring them remotely since my second day here. Everything you've done to every teacher, every student, every victim over the past 3 years is documented in federal databases." The color drained from Ethan's face as the full scope of his situation became clear. "But the real problem for you," Madison continued, "is that you're not just facing local charges, sexual assault on federal property, using interstate communications for extortion, conspiracy to violate civil rights, racketeering. These are federal crimes with federal sentences." Blake dropped his phone entirely. Mason sat heavily in a chair, looking sick. Ashley had gone completely silent. "Furthermore," Madison said, pressing her advantage, "every teacher you've intimidated, every student you've coerced, every family you've extorted, they're all going to be contacted by federal victim assistance programs, and they're all going to be offered immunity in exchange for testimony." Ethan made one last desperate attempt at control. "My father will—" "Your father is also under federal investigation," Madison interrupted. "Did you think we wouldn't notice that this system exists At 4 other elite schools with Crane family connections that we wouldn't trace the money flows, that we wouldn't investigate the institutional patterns. The room fell completely silent except for Madison's calm, professional voice. Robert Crane is facing RICO charges for running a criminal enterprise across multiple states. Your little training program here, it's evidence in a federal conspiracy case that's been building for 6 months. Madison walked to her desk, gathered her materials, and headed toward the door. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, turning back to the 4 teenagers who had thought they were untouchable. "FBI agents are already positioned throughout the campus. You're not leaving this building without being arrested." As if summoned by her words, the classroom door opened and Agent Ryan Mitchell entered, followed by 2 other federal agents. "Agent Torres," he said with professional courtesy. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Agent Mitchell, but I believe you'll want to take these 4 into custody for sexual assault on a federal officer, among other charges." As the agents moved to arrest Ethan and his network, Madison stepped into the hallway and saw Dylan Hayes standing near the stairwell, his eyes wide with amazement and relief. "Dylan," she said gently, "I think it's time for you to tell Agent Mitchell everything you wanted to tell me at the library." Dylan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Ms. Torres, there are others, so many others, and we have evidence. We've been documenting everything, waiting for someone who could actually do something about it." Madison put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure justice finally comes to Clearwater Academy." As sirens wailed in the distance and federal agents secured the scene, Madison realized that Emma Rodriguez's face hadn't appeared in her mind once during the confrontation. Maybe some wounds could heal after all. Maybe some promises, once kept, could finally rest.